So next we have Associate Professor Ana Sequeira from ANU. Ana is, I would say, been a luminary, particularly in the work that my lab does. We've always sort of continued to look at what Ana is doing, in particular, her work with Megamove over the last, how many years now? I don't know, it's not a decade, but it's coming close. It's coming close, not gonna age ourselves here, but just a huge amount of work on an absolutely massive data set. So we very much look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you. Yeah, you can see I look a lot younger, right? It all started. Anyway, yeah, my name is Ana Sequeira. Yeah, really nice to be here and get to present to you today. I'm going to be focusing a lot of this presentation on the work Megamove has been doing in the past few years. And just as, you know, by means of introduction, even though I come from the harder sciences, that's my background, I'm really passionate about the ocean. I've always been, and I've been lucky enough to work with a bunch of different species in the field. So on the top left, it's me and my team tagging some tiger sharks in Shark Bay. I work with loggerhead and green turtles in the field. I've done some work with sea lions as well. And you know, one of the main reasons why I came to Australia in the first place was to work with whale sharks, which they are mine. I know you're not supposed to be one, but they are mine. Yes, I've done a lot of work with whale sharks, and one of the things that made me want to work with whale sharks was when I was at the end of uni, I was just so passionate about these animals, and I was reading everything about them. I was just fascinated. And I realized that a lot of the publications about them were just about the whale sharky Nigaloo that went left and right and then turned back again. And then the whale sharky, I don't know where. And it was just very localized. Yet these animals roam entire ocean basins. And I was just fascinated that no one was looking at these animals at the true scales at which they move. So I wanted to do that. And that's what brought me to Australia in the first place. So on the top left there, you can see a map of my first attempt of putting together global tracking data. And as you can see, it was not an easy task, first because there was not that much data at the time. And so it was really complicated to make anything with those just few tracks around the world. Yet I was able to use data that was accessible to me, mostly based on fisheries logbooks, because they are the people in the oceans that see these species all the time. So with the information that I was able to get, I still was able to create the first global connectivity models for whale sharks that might explain how the animals might be connected across all those different locations where they are regularly seen, and then use the information to create the first global distribution models for the species, particularly to understand how much, for example, climate change might affect their distribution. And so it's not shown on this slide, but for the first time, about 12 years ago now, whenever it was, I did the first global prediction models that showed that climate change was actually leading to the distribution going forward. So there might be a shift in the distribution and maybe even a break in the connection between northern and southern hemisphere populations. So at that time, no one was thinking about this at these very large spatial scales. This was a really pioneer type of work in that field. And I finished my PhD and I was just so sad because nothing happened, you know. I just came in and I did all these studies on whale sharks. I looked at a perspective that no one had ever looked before and nothing had happened, and I was really frustrated about it. It was only quite a few years later that I saw that my research had been useful to change the conservation status of the species from vulnerable to endangered. And that was my yoo-hoo moment. I was like, okay, it was worth something. It took a while for it to be recognized, but this really excited me. It's really something that I'm interested in, to create the type of research that is needed towards the conservation of the species. So I started with whale sharks, and to go from whale sharks to all megafauna, which is what I work now, it took quite a while and it took a lot of people. So this was a publication that came out in PNAS. We made the cover. I was really excited about that. And we worked with almost about 60 people to show the potential of bringing data sets together and the types of cool stuff we could do by looking at these different perspectives. So long story short, on this paper, we found that there was a convergence of movement in the way these animals use the ocean, independently of if they are a little penguin or a blue whale. They seem to navigate in the same way. So in near coastal systems, they show a lot more complex movements, probably associated with the complexity of the habitats as well. But in open ocean, they tend to be very direct. So it's like they know where they're going, and it doesn't matter if it's thousands of kilometers away, they just know what path to follow. So that was a really, really interesting sort of paper that led us on this path of bringing more data set together. And then, of course, thinking about how these animals use the entire global ocean, there's a lot of other uses of the ocean as well, particularly from us humans. So there's 4 examples on the sides of these slides here. Fishing, of course, density has a global footprint, shipping all over the place, noise from shipping everywhere, and all other sources of noise as well. Of course, global warming, there's places with highest and lowest intensity, but it's pretty much everywhere as well. And plastic density, that it's becoming pollution, that it's becoming more and more dense across the different ocean basins. And so there was a paper that we published thinking about this, that it's not only the individual threats. So I showed you for whale sharks, I focused specifically on global warming to do those global models, but there's actually a lot more going on, and it ends up being really a soup of threats. Okay, in the ocean where these animals live, there's just threats happening right, left, and center. And these threats, in a map, you see them like this, but they are all dynamic. Okay, so the threats are happening and changing on a daily basis. The oceans move, it's an environment that it's alive, and the animals are moving as well. So there's really a very complex system here for us to be able to understand the interactions between animals and human activities and look at the consequences of those interactions. So they are all dynamic, they occur simultaneously, the threats, and they are concurrent with animal movement across different species as well. And so in a perspective piece I wrote for Nature a few years ago now, I was commenting on someone else's paper that was really exciting about tracking data, and I just put forward some ideas to advance global conservation of this species. So basically, I was just giving a shout to everyone, and particularly researchers in the field, just saying it's time to pull all our data sets together to address pressing conservation concerns. We're not going to save these species if we just keep working on our little individual ways. And the idea is we can combine them with information that it's already available at global scale for human activities, and then together that will help us deliver the needed information we need to alleviate impacts from the threats. And so just in a nutshell, there's a little list of things that I think are really useful to do it, and if I was preaching it, I thought I might as well start doing it myself as well, working with a lot of colleagues. So first of all, of course, we need to compile data. The data needs to be standardized. This is the whole world and the whole story and the whole presentation. I'm not going to do it today, but there's a lot of work done towards this, and I'm going to just show you the result of what I've done and how it looks like. And then we need to identify the most important areas for these animals. We need to evaluate how much the species are vulnerable to the different threats and at different stages of their life and all this. So there's a whole level of information that needs to be created. We need to understand what's the extension of the overlap with the threats and how does this happen, particularly in this dynamic environment. And then once we have that, we need to assess the real risk. Because one thing is being vulnerable, like I'm very vulnerable to lightning, but for me to be affected by it, I need to be stricken by one. So you need to understand what risk means. And then of course, there's a lot of other considerations that go beyond even science, not just ecology and animal ecology and all of that. So I'm just going to very quickly go through this. And it was with all of this in mind that MegaMove was created. So MegaMove is a global scientific project that focuses on understanding marine megafauna movement with this particular idea of advancing global conservation. And our slogan really is tracking our global heritage, mostly to create this sense that these animals belong to us all, which means that it's our responsibility to take care of them as well. So it's just with a general idea. The site is megamove.org. And this project was endorsed by the United Nations under the current decade of ocean science, so that made it all really exciting. And so we, together with hundreds of researchers from around the world, we collected all the data. I did say that I was going to bypass all that process. This is the result. Once the data is all collated, all standardized, this is the type of information you now get. So the oceans are alive, the animals are moving everywhere. And instead of us looking at ships that are doing this in the ocean, we can actually just focus our attention on the species that live in the ocean. Okay, this is their home. And by having us going into the ocean to do certain types of activities, we are actually impacting the places where they live. So the data set includes, when we put it together, it was about 15,000 tracks. By the time you corrected everything, it's a bit less than that. But it's data from more than 100 species covering turtles, whales, sharks, seals, penguins, polar bears, dugongs, and so on. So a really large number of taxa as well. So with this data together, it came at a really good time because the Global Biodiversity Framework adopted in December 2022 has as a main goal halting human-induced extinction of threatened species. So for this, we need to understand how this extinction is happening and how the overlaps with human activities take place. And they want to bring the loss of areas of high biodiversity importance to close to zero by 2030. And we are already 2025, so we don't have much time to complete all of this. And then just backing what the biodiversity framework says, the High Seas Treaty was adopted 6 months later and it's currently being ratified. There was a big meeting in Nice last week about this. I actually haven't checked how much ratifications have been done, how many countries ratified it, but it's all happening now. And one of the main objectives is to increase the marine protected areas to cover about 30% of the ocean. So to give you a perspective, the current percentage of the ocean that includes marine protected areas is about 8%. So they want to increase to 30%, which is of course a fantastic resolution, but it leads to a key question. Do you know what question it is? What's the key question? Let's protect 30% of the ocean. Where are we going to protect, right? So that's the big key question that comes afterwards. So the paper that Daniel was just mentioning before came out a couple of weeks ago. In science, it's using the tracking data that we have in megamove to understand how to achieve conservation targets, these conservation targets that I just mentioned. And so the data set, just a quick note, this involves our community of megamovers, that's how I call them. So we have about 400 people involved in megamove. So this is how the data looks like in static. So it covers about 70% of the global ocean, and there's areas where you can see there's a lot of animals that have been tracked in different positions, up to more than 1,000. Across all these different types of groups. And so now with this information, we put it together and use the tracking data, so the movement data. So the really important part of this is that with movement data, we have dynamics. We know where the animals were at a certain time, we know how they were doing, we know the speed of movement, we know the behavior that they had in those different locations, which means that then we can assess what they were doing in different parts of the ocean as well. And so the paper that came out was focusing on understanding these important marine megafauna areas, which are areas that use for important behaviors such as migratory corridors or some sort of residential behaviors that are used for nesting for resting, breeding, foraging, feeding, and so on. So this is what the map looks like. The greens and blues show those important areas across the entire globe where we found that a lot of different species were doing similar important behaviors. The yellow shows the current 8% protected areas in the ocean, and red is our indication of where the potential extension up to 30% could be if we were to protect marine megafauna. So you can see that there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot of areas that will obviously help alleviate pressure. Shall the areas chosen to be protected coincide with areas that are important for marine megafauna, but you can still see a lot of blues and greens there, which means that 30% is simply not enough to protect all those important areas that we are wanting to protect. And so long story short here, the idea is not, it's not enough, so let's not do it. No, we should definitely do it, and it's definitely a very important step. But now we are in 2025, and we already know that we're not going to achieve the target. So let's do something else to allow us to reach that target while we still have some time. And that includes, for example, using mitigation strategies. Many of those mitigation strategies are already very well known, like changes in fishing gear, for example, or implementation of ghost flow zones for ships and so on, that can already be implemented to alleviate impacts in areas that might not be protected. And one of my PhD students, Michelle Van she just finished, as the paper is accepted in conservation biology, is just focused on understanding species vulnerability to threats. So even though there might be an overlap, doesn't mean that something's going to happen to the species. We need to understand what's the species vulnerability. And so even though we are mostly focused on movement in megamove, we did reach out to a lot of experts in the field. So this paper also has about 300 co-authors, not necessarily the same, because these are experts not necessarily in movement. And so we came up with a way to use the current framework from IUCN that uses timing, scope, and severity to create an assessment of the vulnerability of marine megafauna species that were not complete in the IUCN. And then because we use experts to help us with this work, we also added a certainty measure so we can gauge how sure the person that was answering our questions about how much species was vulnerable to different types of threats. And in this case, we extended it to about 200 species, and we're talking about 23 threats, so all those major threats, but actually subdivided. For example, if we had fishing, we're talking about drifting long lines and fixed gear, and so really going down to all the different types of threats. And so, yeah, so we could have an idea of how sure they were about their replies. So hopefully this paper will be out soon and we'll be able to have a good idea. And moving on to beyond science specifically, there tends to be this sort of a discussion between the ecologists and the policymakers and conservation managers. Each of them say it's the other. So ecologists say they take too long, they never do anything. By the time they do it, it's too late. And the managers say they keep changing their minds. They don't give us an answer that it's for all species. They just say for one is something, for another is something else. So, and actually, in the end, it's a much more complex system than just ecology and law. And so we just published a paper recently that really highlights the three-dimensional complexity. And we made this analogy with the Rubik's Cube. So a lot of pieces of that puzzle needs to be aligned in time and space, and also ideas across not just law, not just ecology or science, but also across the human and social aspects of this. And so one of the examples that people hear about a success for conservation is the successful story is the whale conservation story. But if we drill down to why was it that was this a success story, we'll understand that there's several layers. So first, there was scientific evidence for declining of populations. Okay, we knew that they were declining, and at the same time, there was some development for replacement of products. For example, to replace whale oil. We now had ways to replace that, so we did not need that natural source. There was an international agreement with the International Whaling Commission that was ready to facilitate the protection of whale conservation. And they did a lot of steps. It was decades in the process. They did a lot of steps to try and make it happen, but the fishers were having none of it because obviously they made a lot of money going out to fish. So what happens was there was a shift in human values, and this corresponded, I don't know if you guys remember, with the whale song. There was a publication in the 70s about the whale song, and so the masses went just crazy because it was so lovely to hear all the whales sing and all of that. And so people became a lot more aware of what was happening with whales. But really the key was declining economic returns. The populations were declining, the fishes were going out and not getting as much for their much back for their efforts. So at the end of the day, unfortunately, and I hate to cut it for you, you probably already know, it's all about money. So if there's money being made, it's going to continue. If there's alternatives, then people think through that. And why this is so important as well, because conservation also needs financing. So to be able to conserve, we need the money to create the conservation actions and to implement them. It's actually part of the goal, the same global biodiversity framework that aims to stop, to halt human-induced extinctions. In the same document, by the same deadline, they also say that we need to increase the money. So how come we can do the conservation before having the money? It's a little bit tricky, isn't it? So I was thinking about this and how can we actually think about this in ways that aid conservation. And then I was thinking, it's all about movement. What's happening? They are particularly focused on increasing official development assistance. So this is about global north and global south and how money can sort of be moved from one place to the other to improve conservation. So I was thinking, well, we know what the animals are doing in the ocean. We know what countries they connect, which, sometimes global north and global south, it's just, there's this sort of, they are completely separate, but they're actually not. These animals in the ocean are connecting many different countries, and we know exactly which countries they connect because we have the movement. We know, these are all published information. We know where they go, we know which countries they connect, and there's a lot of connections between global north and global south, between developed countries and countries in development. So the idea was, can we think about these animals and the ecosystem services they provide from this financing perspective? So for example, a whale shark. Whale sharks has a lot of different values. For example, indigenous value. It might have a very significant contribution with nutrient, for example, in oligotrophic waters, it brings nutrients from the bottom to the surface and so on. It can work as a carbon sink just by their massive bodies. They are huge accumulators of carbon. Very important for ecotourism, a lot of money being made with that. There might be bycatch happening, so actually impacting the species. There might be a lot of illegal fisheries as well. All of these are ecosystem services that actually have a dollar value. Okay, so we can actually use this as a way to connect different countries and create a system of credits and penalties that might actually assist creating the funds for conservation. So we put up this in this paper that just came out at the end of last year. We presented this as a nature-based solution for financing conservation by the deadline that we need to have it sorted. And we introduced this concept of ecosystem services on the move, which is normally associated with, there's ecosystem services and they are transported somewhere by someone. And in this case, it's actually the producer of the services that move. So a new concept that is introduced in the sort of environmental economics field as well. So yeah, just to finish very quickly, all of this, we need collaboration. We are trying to address questions that are important at global scale. We're not going to do it alone. Collaboration is key. And as you've seen, I do work with a lot of different people, including hundreds of authors in many cases. So I get a lot of questions. Oh, no, how do you do it? How do you develop this? How do you get in contact? So I thought might as well write a paper about it. So there we go. If you're interested, have a look. We have all the important points from the design and conceptualization of the studies all the way to publication deliverables and thinking about continuity of the project as well. So yeah, if you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to talk about it. This is pretty much what I have for you. If you want to know more about what I do, there's a few links here for you to have a look. And I do have a little video that I don't mind playing while you have questions. Is that okay to do this? So I'll just leave it running, but feel free to just ask questions.